Welcome back to the Pokemon Seasonal League Draft Analysis. So, for those of you who do not know who I am Silver Star, coach of your Atlanta Altarias, and I will be participating in the Pokemon Seasonal League Winter Division. Alright, I don't want to waste too much time. Let's just get right into it. First thing we have to cover. First of all, this is a draft video, a draft analysis more specifically. So, you'll see on the left, those are going to be my picks. You can see about 12 slots there, so a little bit of a spoiler for the rules going forward. I'm in the Winter Division, like I said, which is, it's not the lowest tier, but it's also not the highest tier. I'm very middle of the road, which makes sense given my level of skill. I haven't played draft in about 2+ years. Literally the last time I played was the last video I uploaded on my YouTube channel, so that can give you an idea of the level of skill I am. I'm pretty rusty, but I'm super excited to get into it. I don't want to waste too much time, so let's quickly go over a couple of the rules. First rule, basically just how the draft works. Each person is going to draft 10 to 12 Pokemon. They can draft 10 and have a higher point average. So let's just say there's 120 points for the draft. If you draft 10 Pokemon, your average Pokemon is going to be stronger than mine if I were to draft 12. If that makes sense. So each player has to draft a minimum of 10, a maximum of 12. It's going to be a snake style draft, so first pick is going to go, and then it's going to go all the way down to the 16th pick. 16th person is going to pick again, and then it's going to go all the way back to the first pick. First pick goes, and so on and so forth. I ended up being the 6th pick, which, for those of you that don't know draft, you never want to be in the middle. It's kind of like the worst place to be, universally agreed upon. I would say maybe 6th pick to 10th pick, maybe 8th or 9th pick. Those are like the worst picks. It happens. I still think we got a really great draft out of it. I'm really excited to see what I can do. Next thing I want to cover is the format. We are playing in Paldea Dex post-home format, which essentially means that everything in Paldea is allowed. And then also mods that will be introduced post-home, so stuff like the Genies, Greninja, the Hisuian Pokemon, all of those will be legal with their movesets. Another thing about this is that it also really limits certain moves that were really widespread. Stuff like Defog and Knockoff that were super common moves in the previous generations are now very limited, high priority moves because they were move tutors before and no longer are. I don't love this format, if I'm being 100% honest with you. It's my first time playing it. I did an exhibition match and I've seen a lot of other people play it. It has become super offensive and hazard oriented because there's very few hazard removers that are reliable and good. And I don't really love that, but I'm excited to see how it plays out. It's new for me, it's interesting. So going forward, I might not do other Paldea Dex post-home format drafts, but for this one, I'm super excited to see how it works out. Last thing I wanted to say is if you guys played the most recent games in Paldea, the gimmick this generation was terrestrializing. So in this league, we will have one unrestricted Terra Captain, which essentially means we'll have one Pokemon that can Terra into whatever type it wants, and it is able to use Terra Blast. So in other leagues you might see, you might have like 2 Pokemon, one can become this type, one can become the other type, and maybe they can't use Terra Blast because it's too widespread, strong on Pokemon like Regieleki and Spectrier. But in this format, we're allowing Terra Blast and unrestricted, but only on one Pokemon. So those are all the rules I have to get into. Let's actually get into the draft. So like I said, I was the 6th pick, which essentially means 5 people went before me and about 20 picks were going to go after me. So my first pick had to be something I was comfortable with, most importantly. And then secondly, something I can really build a team around. So I went with comfort. You don't have to pick a Pokemon you're comfortable with, but after not having been in the format for over 2 years, I wanted to go with the Pokemon I knew, something I knew I could build around, I could draft around, and I could play around. So, without further ado, the very first Pokemon drafted to the Atlanta Altarias this season is Greninja. Greninja is such a good Pokemon. First of all, one of the coolest starters. It's super fast, 122 base speed, decently strong on both ends with 95 attack and 103 special attack. So it's decent on both ends, right? The reason I drafted Greninja is versatility, all right? Essentially, in the past formats, when I was really playing Pokemon a lot more, Greninja had two insane abilities. If you drafted Greninja, you either drafted Protein Greninja or Battle Bond Greninja, and then if both of those were banned, he was a tier 3 usually, which is like average. Stuff like Jolteon is in that tier. In Paldea, Greninja got super nerfed. So Protein got nerfed. Instead of being able to change your type infinitely throughout the battle, you can only change it once per switch in. So if I use U-turn, nothing changes. But if I click Ice Beam and then U-turn, I stay in Ice type when I use my U-turn. So, huge nerf to Greninja in any set that's not like a choice set. The other huge nerf to Greninja was Battle Bond got like absolutely slammed. Battle Bond in the past was you changed into Ash Greninja, which had like insane, like basically a mega evolution, but it was triggered when you killed a Pokemon. Instead of that, now Greninja essentially gets one-time Moxie and speed boost. So when Greninja heals a Pokemon, now it will get +1 to speed, special attack, and attack one time, which is pretty strong. And I think when you actually switch in, it's a little bit stronger than Ash Greninja, but in Draft League it's way worse because when you switch out, you lose those buffs. So it's like a one-time Moxie almost. It is what it is. Obviously, those both weren't going to be allowed on the same Pokemon if they weren't nerfed. But because they were both nerfed, both of those abilities are legal on Greninja, which sets it up as like an insanely versatile Pokemon in my opinion. On one end, you have Protean Greninja, which if you're running a choice set, nothing has changed for Protean Greninja, right? It's super strong, it's super fast, and you're changing to get stab on any of your moves. On the other end, if you're running a Battle Bond set, you can go for a late game, end game cleaner, like a late game sweeper, instead of a previous like breaker trying to capitalize off of switches, stuff like that. Which is interesting. It's a whole new role. It's a Pokemon I'm really excited to use. And you'll see later in my draft, I don't like to view Greninja as a Water Dark type. At least I didn't in the past because of its Protean. But in this draft, I did kind of like view it more so as having those types. Like usually I'll just say it's like a blank. It's just like a strong Pokemon. But this time I was like, okay, it's a Water Dark type. It's going to have some of the roles a Water Dark type might have, like stopping pranks for Pokemon and that kind of thing. So, after I picked Greninja, we had about, I think, something like 30 picks. Maybe not 30. I think like 25 picks in between me and my next pick. So I had a long time to go, and by the time it actually came up to me, because of how few Pokemon are in the Paldea post-home format, I didn't think there was a lot of great high-tier options. So I went with it's still a high-tier Pokemon, but it's a little lower down, and I went with Scizor. Alright, in Paldea post-home, I think there are very few really good Steel types. Like, if I had to I think I could list them all in one hand. You have, like, Goldengo, Scizor. I think Bronzong is really good in this format. And, people might say, like, something like Tinkaton. I don't think it's even that good. Something like Magnezone, maybe, but it's very, very limited, right? So, I picked up one of the strongest ones I think is there. Because Scizor, if you guys don't know, is really, really great Pokemon. Only has one weakness to fire, which is awesome. It is 4 times weakness, but I already have a Pokemon that resisted in Greninja, and I will pick up more as you guys will see later. Scizor has a monstrous attack stat. 130 Technician Bullet Punches can come out, ruin your whole life. Choice Band Technician Bullet Punch from a 130 attack Scizor. It's just, if you don't have a resistance, it's destroying you, right? You're also whipping out Choice Band in U-turns, stab U-turns, more specifically. And another reason I drafted this Pokemon, a reason that I think is super important, specifically in this format, is Scizor has Defog. And realistically, Scizor is one of the better defoggers in the league. At the time I drafted it, I didn't realize that it had lost Roost. So I drafted it thinking it was a bulky Pokemon. Come to find out, Scizor has lost Roost. So its role has kind of changed, but it has gained moves like, I don't think it used to get close combat, and it does now. So it has gained some moves, but it has lost Bug Bite and Roost, which are two pretty huge hits to Scizor. But I think it doesn't really make it a worse Pokemon, it just changes its role a little bit more. Scizor is no longer like a bulky setup sweeper, it's like a monstrous breaker, in my opinion. And I'm super excited to get it. I'm like the guy that you can't use your fairies against. You can't like Calm Mind Sylveon on me because I have Scizor on my team. So I'm super excited to get that. It's a Pokemon I was really, really hyped to get. From this point on, you'll see I have to focus a little bit more on building out my cores because unlike most people, I didn't draft a Fairy Dragon or Steel type round 1. So that's why I had to pick up Scizor early. I had to guarantee a good Steel type. And my next pick is going to be a Dragon type, spoilers. Unlike the last pick, between Greninja and Scizor, there's like 20-something picks. Between Scizor and my next pick, there's only like 9 or 10. So I was okay taking Scizor because I think it's a really high priority Pokemon and not taking a Dragon type. Where now, a little bit of a spoiler, my next pick is going to be a Dragon type. So I went with Salamence. This is a Pokemon that it's just amazing. It's so versatile. A lot like Greninja, it's a really, really versatile Pokemon, right? You can be relatively bulky with 80s in the defenses, 95, and a reliable recovery with Roost. Or you can be a Scarf set, a Band set, and a little bit more predictably, a Dragon Dance set, right? That's kind of like the Salamence thing is Dragon Dance Sweeper, and it's good at what it does. A little extra thing to tag on here is I picked Salamence as my Terra Captain. So Salamence will be able to get rid of that 4x Ice weakness in case they have something like a really good Ice Shard Pokemon, like Weavile. I don't need to have that 4x weakness on Salamence. I can Terrasilize it into a Dragon type, which would give me basically adaptability on my Dragon type attacks, and would also get rid of the 4x weakness, just make it a weakness. If I wanted to, I could even Terrasilize it into like a Steel type, so I am not weak to Ice at all. I resist Ice. Terrasilizing has added a lot to the format. I'm not going to say an opinion on it now because I'm a little like mixed on it, but I think it's super interesting, and I think Salamence is a really good pick for a terrestrial Pokemon. Greninja was also up there in my decision because it can basically get adaptability on any attack because of how Protean works, but I went with Salamence, and I'm pretty happy about it as a setup sweeper. It's going to be really, really great, and it was only 13 points, which, considering the maximum number of points was, I think, 19. Salamence at 13 is a steal. It was below Scizor. It was in the same tier as, like, Sylveon. I think it was lower tier than Sylveon and Hawlucha. And that's crazy because Salamence is a really, really good Dragon type, especially being able to Terrasilize. So now I'm filling out my cores, as you see. There is one thing I want to get here. I was going to wait a lot longer to take this pick. This was something I was considering more around 5 or 6. But Gastrodon went in the same round that Salamence went. At the end of it, but it went in round 3, I think. Maybe in early round 4. But Gastrodon went. And my pick was Quagsire. So it has a super similar role to Gastrodon. And if Gastrodon went so early, I was really nervous that Quagsire would also go early. So I picked Quagsire round 4. I think I was the first person to drop below like 9 or 8 points. Quagsire is a little lower tier than Gastrodon, but I think it really can do similar things, and it's really, really great. If you guys don't know, Quagsire got pretty heavily buffed this generation. It finally got access to Spikes and Stealth Rock, and on top of that, it even got access to Toxic Spikes. So Quagsire, and I think Gastrodon got the exact same moves. Quagsire actually now has everything it's ever wanted. It did lose Scald, But unlike Gastrodon, I don't think Quagsire got hurt by losing Scald too much. Especially because of the new moves. Sometimes, like, I wouldn't even have run Scald on it, I don't think. It would be like Earthquake, Recover, Stealth Rock, Toxic Spike, Earthquake, Recover, Stealth Rock, Spikes. Like, I don't even know if I would have run Scald on it anyways. So I don't feel the hit of Scald as much as something like Gastrodon, or like, I don't think Seismitoad's in this generation, but Seismitoad might. So I was super okay with Quagsire. I'm super excited to use it. I think it's one of the best Pokemons. And another reason I wanted to pick it, and that I needed one of these water ground types, was because with Scizor and Quagsire on my team, it forces people to either run Terra Fire or Terra Grass if they're running like offensive sets, or just like Fire coverage or Grass coverage sometimes. It's kind of similar to like the Hidden Power conundrum that used to be around in Gen 7 and Gen 8. Or Gen 7, I don't know if it was in Gen 8. I didn't play Gen 8 much. But in Gen 7, where people would have to run like HP Ice or HP Fire for your Scizor or your Salamence, or HP Fire or HP Grass for your Quagsire or your Scizor. So, kind of like something I've taken from that. Maybe it's not as viable anymore because Hidden Power's gone, but if you draft a 4 times weakness, almost always you should draft another 4 times weakness, because on their own, it's easy to bring coverage, but as soon as you get a couple more of them, it's a lot harder, because Quagsire, a lot like Scizor, has one weakness and it's Grass, right? Scizor has one weakness and it's Fire. And Quagsire Quagsire resists Fire, obviously, very well. Scizor resists Grass very well. They work super well defensively with each other, and I think I had to get it. If it was gone, I would have been in a pretty bad position, because there's no other water ground types. It's not like previous generations where you can get Swampert, you can get Seismitoad, you can get all those Pokemon. It's just Gastro and Quag this time. So seeing as Gastrodon went, I had to drop for Quag pretty early. But in my next pick, this messed me up a lot, because in the same round that Quagsire went, no, I think in the round after, Sylveon ended up going. And Sylveon was a Pokemon I was going to draft right after Salamence. I was going to draft Sylveon really nice and early, get a really strong Fairy Dragon Steel core out there. But because I wanted to get Quagsire to pair with Scizor, I didn't end up getting it. So instead I was looking at Pokemon in similar tiers. At this point, most of the high tier Pokemon are gone, and I had a ton of points to work with. So if you look, I haven't gotten a Pokemon above 16 points. And we have 120 for 12 mons, so I have a huge amount of points left. So I was looking at Pokemon, not for the next pick, but for later in the draft, like Jolteon. Jolteon's a Pokemon I really like and I'm really comfortable with. But because I had so many points, I ended up going with Thundurus Incarnate here. So Thundurus Incarnate was still around for 13 points. I believe Therian had gone by this point, and I just wanted to get a really strong electric type. Jolteon was definitely in consideration for me, especially being a possible Terra captain or something. But Thundurus Incarnate is just so good and not something I really want to pass up. It has really good coverage. It has Prankster in a super offensive format like the one we're in now. Stuff like Prankster Thunder Wave and Prankster Taunt are really strong tech moves to have. On top of that, you have Prankster Setup, so something like Nasty Plot Bulk Up sets, really strong. But I mostly picked it because I love electric types, one of my favorite types in draft. I love just slamming out powerful Volt Switches. And there's not a whole lot you can do about a Thundurus Volt Switch, because you can't really predict, like, oh, he's going to click Volt Switch, I have to go into my ground type, because Thundurus is one of the electric types that actually gets U-turn as well. So I'm the kind of guy that would run U-turn a lot over Volt Switch, but I love sending out powerful Volt Switches, power for Thunderbolts. Not a whole lot you can do about it unless you have a great ground type, in which case I'm just U-turning out on you. I'm going into Greninja, I'm going into Quagsire. What are you going to do? Nothing. Thundurus is really strong Pokemon. A Pokemon that I'm really excited to use. I have actually used, if you guys have watched any of my videos before, I've used the core of Greninja Thundurus offensively before, in Generation 7 when both of them were Tier 1s. But in this case, instead of drafting them as like Tier 1 high priority Pokemon, they're a little bit lower priority compared to newer ones, which affords me the ability to go more lower priority Pokemon, if that makes sense. So instead of going like Palafin and Roaring Moon, I went Greninja and Salamence, which gets me like 5 extra points. So maybe they're not as powerful, but I have more stuff that you have to be afraid of coming later in the draft, if that makes sense. So Thundurus, I'm really excited to use. It's fast, it has great coverage, and it's super versatile, just like a lot of other Pokemon on this list so far. My next pickup. So I was hoping for Sylveon, but if it went, I had Florges as a backup. But they ended up going one after another really quickly. And I was getting terrified at this point that I was going to end up with a bad fairy type, which is not where you want to be with stuff like Roaring Moon and like Dragonite and all these powerful Pokemon in the format. So I ended up picking Gardevoir. Gardevoir is 11 points, as you can see there. Pretty high, but it's not a Pokemon I love. Base 80 on such an offensive mon that's not super bulky is not really a position I love to be in, but I think Scarf Trace Gardevoir sets are very strong. They've always been strong, and I don't think they've gotten any worse, especially with like I just said, Roaring Moon's in the format. Scarf Moonblast has not gotten any worse, trust me. It's still a really great set. But I was looking a little further because I've actually never looked too deeply into Gardevoir. So I drafted it and then looked at it a little bit more. And I was like, wow, this Pokemon gets a lot, actually. It gets Wish, which I never knew Gardevoir got Wish. That's pretty interesting because that's like a whole huge benefit to fairy types is their Wish passing with like Florges, Screamtail, and Sylveon. Also really wanted Screamtail, but that was gone in round 3, so I was never really going to get it. But it gets Wish passing, which I thought was super interesting. And then obviously, if you've ever seen Gardevoir's coverage, there is nothing this Pokemon can't hit super effectively. It gets everything you want. It got Energy Ball, Shadow Ball, Moonblast, Psychic, Psyshock, and like everything. There's nothing you're not messing up with a Gardevoir. It's really just like predicting what move you have to click in the right moment. It's a really great fairy type. I think this is a format that you're actually freed up a little bit to go an offensive fairy because of how terrestrialization works. Your Sylveon's not really walling a Salamence because I'll Terra Steel Iron Head you and you're dead and you can't touch me. It's like, I think offensive Pokemon are really given a lot of benefit in this meta. So I think this is the type of situation that Gardevoir goes crazy. And I'm actually really excited to use it now that I've looked at it a lot more. I was a little nervous at first, but I'm actually really excited to use it. I think spec sets do very well because there's a lot of bulky Pokemon that like to be bulky hitters. Stuff like Iron Thorns, Iron Hands. A lot of Pokemon that aren't super fast but are very powerful that are going to get slammed by a Specs Gardevoir set. And I'm super excited to see how it performs there, especially when it's combined with some of the best like momentum Pokemon in the format with Greninja, Scizor, and Thundurus all on my team. I get slow U-turns, I get fast Volt Switches, I get fast U-turns with Greninja. So I'm really excited to get Gardevoir in here easily from a Scizor switch. Scizor takes a hit, U-turns out, Gardevoir spec set, nothing's living. Super excited to see that. That goes for all my Pokemon as well. Like, I have really good momentum so far. I'm hoping to carry that on with the draft. But you'll see, I think Gardevoir is one of my slower offensive Pokemon. But with Scarf sets, that's totally fine. My next Pokemon, this was the kind of the point where my draft had been a little bit messed up because of the Sylveon pick, and the Quagsire early is really what threw me off, is having to pick Quagsire. Because there are still 2 Pokemon that I really want to pick up, but I know like for a fact that I'm only going to be able to get one of them here. So I have to make a decision. I'll be 100% honest with you. I wanted either Amoonguss or Arcanine. So on one end, Arcanine is a Pokemon I'm super comfortable with, especially with Thundurus and Greninja. I used all 3 of these Pokemon, I think, in the same draft. Maybe not, but close enough. So it's a Pokemon I'm really comfortable with, especially in concert with these other Pokemon. And Amoonguss is another Pokemon that I haven't gotten to use as much, but I know it's really good. I mean, it's a regenerator Pokemon. It's grounded poison, which is something that's super important to this format with how prevalent toxic spikes have become. But I ended up picking Amoonguss here. I wanted Arcanine. I really like the idea of Intimidate spam with Salamence Arcanine, but they really nerfed Intimidate anyways. So I ended up going with Amoonguss here. Pairs super well with Quagsire and Scizor. Yes, Scizor and Amoonguss are both weak to fire, but Quagsire resists that like crazy. So does Salamence. So I was comfortable picking Amoonguss here, mostly because it's a grounded poison type. That gives it a huge advantage over other grass types, right? Because, first of all, I can't be poisoned. That's big. I can't be spored like all other grass types. And really, absorbing Toxic Spikes is really big with how big they are in this generation. Regenerator is always going to be a really good ability. It means I can switch in and out a lot more without having to mess about with like healing up in battle. It affords me the ability to run no recovery on Amoonguss. I mean, like, you could run Black Sludge Regenerator, but not Synthesis. Or you could run, like, Heavy Duty Boots Synthesis Regenerator, but, like, not have leftover type items. It just gives it a lot more, like, versatility than something like, I don't know many other bulky grass types, but like a Venusaur, right? You're better than a Venusaur because you have that Regenerator ability. It's super good. So, Amoonguss was a Pokemon I thought I needed a little bit more than Arcanine, right? Just like a tiny bit, because it helps Quagsire. So Arcanine would have helped Scizor, but Amoonguss helps Quagsire, and I think I'd rather help my bulkier Quagsire, because it's around this point that I realized Scizor doesn't get Roost. So Scissor's not really going to be as much of a part of my defensive core as I thought. But Amoonguss is really great to get here. Pairs super well with Quagsire. Pairs very well with a lot of my other Pokemon, honestly. So I am going to have to focus a little bit more on a fire type a little bit later in the draft. But at this point, Amoonguss is a great Pokemon to pick up. I'm really excited. Spore is such a great move in this type of format, especially when combined with a sweeper like Mence or Greninja nowadays. Or even Scizor with Sword Stance Bullet Punch sets. So, Pokemon I'm really excited to use. I've used it before, and I think I can use it pretty well in this format. So my next pick, it's at this point, Arcanine had gone, unfortunately. If he was still there, I was of course going to pick it. But Arcanine had gone, and with that, I think Hisuian Arcanine had gone as well. Probably way earlier. It's a really good Pokemon. But I'm still looking for a fire type here. And I see a lot of pretty good options. I'm looking at stuff like Moltres. I'm looking at stuff like Moltres. I think I was looking at Hisuian, Typhlosion, normal Typhlosion even. I think fire types are pretty decent always. I don't think they need a huge amount of coverage because fire is just a really great stab. Especially with how much like Scald has been nerfed and stuff. Fire types can kind of run pretty rampant. But I ended up picking Hisuian Typhlosion for my next pick. This is Pokemon I'm insanely excited to use. If you look at my draft so far, I'm really prioritizing Pokemon I've been comfortable using because I want to ease in my transition to this new format. So I've been picking Pokemon I've used before, Pokemon I've used together before, but this is my first Pokemon that's like entirely new. I picked it because I don't want Moltres without Defog. I think Moltres was really strong when it had Defog, but without it, it's a little bit... I think it's still good, but it lowers it from a super defensive Pokemon that can run offensive to it kind of more has to be a little bit more offensive, right? You can't run Roost Defog sets with Heavy Duty Boots. So you're more like a Salamence where you can run some defense, but you're more of an offensive set now. So I was like, if I'm going offensive, I might as well go Pokemon that I think is really strong offensively and grab Hisuian Typhlosion. It's basically budget Chandelure, but a little bit faster. I think it can do all the things Chandelure could do, honestly, just as well, if not a little better in some cases. It has a super spammable new move in this like Infernal Parade move it got, which is basically Hex if Hex could also burn. So that's so good. It's like Venoshock if Venoshock could poison. And it's a 30% chance to burn, which I think in the past you might run stuff like Lumberry on Pokemon, but it's not as prevalent. I don't think people will run stuff like that anymore because of how much Scald got nerfed. So if you burn something, I think that burn stays, right? So that's a super spammable move. It's like, yeah, I could switch in all these Pokemon, but they'll get burned, and then they're taking double damage from this Infernal Parade move, which is like huge because that's a 120 base power move at that point. Also, Fire, very spammable type like I was talking about, and there's not as many offensive checks to Hisuian Typhlosion because I got Greninja, somebody got Palafin out there. I really wanted Palafin, but I didn't get it. So there's not as many offensive checks to fire types, and there's not as many good defensive checks because Scald got nerfed so heavily. Not nerfed as in like it's weaker, but nerfed in like how many Pokemon get it. I think it's only Volcanion now. So Hisuian Typhlosion is a Pokemon I really like. I wanted a Ghost type for spin blocking as well because Defog got pretty nerfed, so Rapid Spin is the more like premium removal option right now in my opinion. So this blocks spins, and you don't want to give Hisuian Typhlosion a free switch in. I mean, it could be a Scarf set, Spec set, Life Orb set. It's just a really great Pokemon. I even in a exhibition match, it didn't end up working out, but I ran a Fire Spin Curse set to try to take out some bulky threats. I ran it for that new dark ground bull Pokemon, whatever it is. I don't remember. Tinglu or something. I don't know. That thing. And it didn't end up working because it didn't even bring the Pokemon. But I think there's some really unique sets you can run with Typhlosion, and I'm super excited to use it. It looks pretty sick as well, I'm not gonna lie. So, these last 4 Pokemon, I felt as though almost all of my cores were pretty nicely filled. Right, I have a pretty great Fairy Dragon Steel. I have a pretty good Fire Water Grass. The one thing I wanted, and it's not a core that people talk about super often, but I think Psychic Dark Fighting is a pretty important core to finish out, right? So, I have Greninja for Dark type, I have Gardevoir for Psychic type, but I'm missing a Fighting type. So at this point, I am looking at Slitherwing and Hawlucha. I think both are good Pokemon, but I decide to let it go another round before I pick. Because they're both, I think, for 15 points. So both are pretty huge point value. Would be the second highest point value on my team. And not a lot of people have the points to draft them. So I'm like, okay, let me dip for a really good low tier Pokemon that I think will be pretty high priority now and not end up missing him later. So I grab Komala. It's only 3 points. It's the lowest point Pokemon I've drafted so far. But as soon as I picked him, I knew I sniped some people. Komala is a great Pokemon in this format. It gets Rapid Spin, so it gets premium removal. It gets Wish. It gets U-Turn. Right? That's all you need to know about it. Right? It can get momentum, get out of there, slow U-Turns. Something I really, really like, a slow U-Turn on a bulky Pokemon can get you right into a super powerful Pokemon that doesn't want to be taking a hit. Something like your Gardevoir or your Greninja or even your Thundurus. Something really powerful. At this point, even Typhlosion. Right? Also, Wish Passing, just something really nice, especially now that I know Scizor doesn't get Roost. Wish Passing was something I really kind of wanted to fill him out, make him more of a bulky Pokemon if I want him to be, and I think this does great there. So, it's Pokemon I'm pretty excited to get. It's also immune to status except for sleep. I don't actually know how its ability works. It's something weird with sleep. It can like only sleep or something. It's like permanently asleep, but can use moves. I don't really know. Weird Pokemon. Super excited to use it though. I have used it in the past. I've used pretty exclusively bulky sets, I think. Yeah, I wish I was the kind of player that could do like I saw people talking about a Last Resort set that it used to have. I don't think it gets Last Resort anymore, but it does have surprisingly good coverage options. So I was kind of just like thinking about it. It's a decent offensive Pokemon, honestly. It can take a hit like an Assault Vest set, maybe. Max HP, Max Attack, Assault Vest. It's taken a lot of special hits there. And it's dishing out relatively big amounts of damage. So it's more versatile than I initially thought. And I think I will be trying a set like that at some point this season. But the majority of times it's coming as a Rapid Spinner, a Wish Passer, and a slow U-Turner, which is really all I need from it. I think that's really great in and of itself. And I'm not worried about getting any more out of it. So, Now we're coming back to me. And Slitherwing has been picked. So it's pretty obvious what I'm picking. I pick Hawlucha. Oh, it's 14 points. Okay, I pick Hawlucha. I don't know how I feel about this Pokemon, in all honesty. Because I'll tell you right now, I do not draft terrain for it. So, it has Unburden and Mold Breaker. Two really, really great abilities. And it has a signature move in Flying Press, which, weird type. I don't think I'll ever be using it. But, weird typing. So, I really don't know how I feel about Hawlucha. It puts my speed tiers insane, though. Because you see 118, it's a little bit slower than Greninja. But really, Hawlucha is like basically a 236 speed tap because of how easy it is to activate doubling its speed. So, Hawlucha with something like some berry, like a Salic Berry, or something like Focus Sash or Eject Button. No, I don't think that one works. Anything that you eat. What is it, White Herb? The one that you can use like a 2 move and 1 move, whatever it is. Anything that's going to be used up like that will then give you a +2 in speed, essentially. So, it's a very interesting Pokemon. In the past with terrain, you would run like Grassy Seed and it would get a +1 defense and then +2 speed, and then you could set up pretty well. Very, very strong. I didn't run terrain. There's still a chance I could do free agent switches to get something like a Thwackey or anything to get some terrain option for it. But I think even without terrain, as long as I'm very creative with my sets, I think you can pretty reliably get the Unburden activation, right? So I think it's going to end up being a good Pokemon. This is a little bit of a spoiler, but free agents are still available, and at this point somebody has dropped Slitherwing. So Slitherwing is in the free agent thing. Let me know your thoughts. Would you pick Slitherwing over Hawlucha? It's a new Pokemon, and I think that's interesting, but it does share weaknesses with my other 14-point Pokemon, being Scizor. And let's be honest, Bug Stab is not the best stab in the game. It's not the kind of thing I want a bunch of. Because if you notice at this point, I do have 3 flying types, but Hawlucha doesn't share any of the weaknesses with the other ones. Yes, Thundurus is weak to Ice, and so is Salamence. Yes, Thundurus is weak to Rock, and so is Salamence. But Electric is neutral to Salamence and Thundurus. That's what Hawlucha is weak to. And Rock, Hawlucha is neutral to. It's like, yeah, I guess it does share some. It's not like a resistance, but it's not actually a huge weakness either. So, I'm okay with it. We'll see. I might end up picking Slitherwing, but I'll keep you guys posted on that. My last 2 Mons. There was one Mon I was super interested in drafting because at the start of the league, one guy told me, like, it was a total joke, but he was like, hey, everybody in Winter Division has to draft an Ice type or they're going to get banned. And I was like, oh no, haha. But I actually looked at the Ice types because this guy said this. And there's one that is still around that I think has a lot of potential to be a really powerful Pokemon in this generation. I ended up picking Cetitan here. Cetitan was 8 points, which is the same as Hisuian Typhlosion. It's one of my lower point value Pokemon. But look at those stats. 113 attack, 170 HP. And now let me tell you, this thing gets both Belly Drum and Ice Shard. So, let's take a second. Let's just imagine this Pokemon is basically Ice-type Azumarill in my opinion. It gets Belly Drum and a really strong priority attack. That's just amazing. For 8 points, this has so much potential to sweep teams. If you don't have a decent resistance to Ice, you're not beating Cetitan. And on top of that, if you don't have a decent resistance to Ice that's faster than Cetitan, it doesn't even matter. Like, oh, I have this really great Ice resistance, Toxapex. Let me hit you with this one. Earthquake, dead. You're gone. It's like, Cetitan is very, very powerful. and something you really have to prepare for. You need something that lives +6 Ice Shard from Titan, or I am wiping you. You're gone. And that is something that I love. I love to have that, like, you have to prep for this Pokemon, or you're gone. And even if you prep for it, as your team gets worn down, maybe you still can't beat it. I love that kind of thing. I've seen Assault Vest sets as well. Its special defense and defense aren't that great, but because of how high its HP is, it's a great bulky Pokemon as well. I've seen Band sets, Band Ice Shard. I've seen Slush Rush sets, which I don't have a Hail Setter, right? But what I do have is the option to run Snowscape on Titan himself, which you might say, like, oh, that's a little stupid. But instead of getting, like, +2 to attack or something, when you run Snow on Titan, you'll get +2 to speed and a +1 to defense, right? Because of how Snow works now. So it's basically getting 3 bonus stats. Yeah, it's not permanent, but if you're sweeping, you don't need it to be permanent, right? So I think that's really interesting and something I'm actually more than willing to do, because it's like Dragon Dance, but I get +1 to speed, an additional +1 to speed, and a +1 to defense instead of attack. I think that's pretty interesting and something that could end up coming if I want to be relatively bulky or something. So it's Pokemon I'm super excited to use, and I can't believe it wasn't drafted at this point. I'm super happy I got it, and it's the Pokemon I was most interested in using from this generation in the lower tiers. So, psyched I got it. My last Pokemon. At this point, I wanted a little bit more bulk. If you're looking at my team, I have Komala, Amoonguss, Quagsire, sort of Scizor, sort of Titan. Like, not a huge amount of bulk that I want. So I'm looking, and I have 3 points left for reference. There's not a lot of great bulk left. But then I saw this Pokemon. Knacklestack. I don't really know how to say his name. I'm going with Knacklestack because it's funny. With Eviolite, this thing is a defensive monster. For 3 points? Are you serious? That's like... I'm so excited. It gets Recover. It gets Stealth Rocks. It gets Body Press. It gets Salt Cure, which is the new move that's signature to the Knacklestack Garganacl line. Right? So I'm super, super excited to be using it. As soon as I drafted it, people were asking me to trade for it. Because, like, for 3 points, this might be one of the biggest steals of the draft, especially to go last round. So defensive. I could see it coming to, like, more than half of my games because of how good it is as a bulky Pokemon. It doesn't get Toxic, which you might be like, oh, for a bulky Pokemon without great attack stats, it's done. But it gets Salt Cure instead, which is against water types, literally just a better Toxic. 25% of your health is gone every time at the end of every turn. Like, your Toxapex, believe it or not, loses to Knacklestack. Your Gastrodon, believe it or not, might lose to Knacklestack if I have it set up right. It's like such a good Pokemon. And I think for 3 points, I'm beyond excited to use it. So, this is your final setup for the Atlanta Altarias. We are running Greninja, Scizor, Salamence, Quagsire, Thundurus, Gardevoir, Amoonguss, Hisuian Typhlosion, Komala, Hawlucha, Titan, and Knacklestack. I'm insanely excited to be your coach of the Atlanta Altarias in the PSL this season, I guess, in the Winter Division. And I can't wait to show you guys what I can do. We're going to brush the rust right off and wipe this league. All right? I'll see you guys hopefully next week for my very first game. And at the beginning of that game, I'll have a little bit of a team builder. And that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week.